Welcome to another Charlas de Renovación Vital, a place of healing, reflection, and work. And today, I have the honor of speaking with one of the world's leading experts on inherited family trauma, Mark Wolyn. He's the author of the international bestseller, It Didn't Start With You, which has sold more than 3 million copies worldwide and has been translated into 42 languages. His work bridges epigenetics, neuroscience, and somatic healing, helping us understand how unresolved family trauma can affect our lives. Mark, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Magnolia. I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome, awesome. So I want to let you know that I've been reading your book and it really impacted the way that I do sessions one on one. One of the most tools that I use every time I do my sessions is visualization. And I would like to, reading your book, I started to learn about some traumas. What I do is grief. I'm a grief therapist.
Mhm.
And along the way, I have learned and I have knowing that some people don't even have grief. Sometimes it's a trauma that they have been carrying from their family in the past. And after read your book, it opened my mind. I was like, wow, this is something that goes behind you. So it didn't start with you. So now that I have you here today, I would like to ask you some questions
Yeah.
so we can understand better on how the traumas can pass from one generation to the other or to the next.
Okay. So let me start with a case. Let me
Okay.
talk about a young woman who is in her mid 20s.
Yes.
And she's dating, but she's choosing all the wrong men. She one relationship after another crashes and burns, and she blames herself and she thinks she's defective, and her self-esteem is very low, and she thinks maybe something happened in her childhood. But her childhood, it was pretty average. It's okay. But she doesn't understand why her life is spiraling, why it's sinking. Every relationship is just ends in a terrible way. What she doesn't realize is that a
Mm-hmm.
trauma that happened to her grandmother when her grandmother was in her 20s sits at the
Mm-hmm.
root of her relationship struggle. So the grandmother um, lost her husband, the love of her life, and she never married again. She was so full of grief and so depressed when she became widowed in her mid 20s. She never moved on. She never married. And then when my client's mother was in her mid 20s,
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously she ended the relationship with my client's father, and she stayed alone in her mid 20s. So my client, without the awareness of knowing she's connected to the loneliness of her grandmother, the loneliness of her
Mm-hmm.
mother, she continues this pattern, almost creating relationships that don't work so that she can join the girls club, so that she can be part of this misery unconsciously. So what I found and why I wrote the book is, there's epigenetics that we can physically inherit the fight, flight, freeze responses that get passed down through the sperm cell and the egg cell, and live in the epigenome. So we can be born with altered brains that are preparing us to deal with traumas that aren't our traumas. So what we need to realize is the reaction to a trauma doesn't necessarily end. It doesn't stop with the people who experienced it. The feelings, the sensations,
Mm-hmm.
specifically the stress response, the way the genes express. This can pass forward to the children and the grandchildren, affecting them in a similar way, even though they didn't personally experience the trauma.
Wow. Mark, how can we know if this trauma is something that we develop in our childhood or something that
Ah,
we inherited from
yeah,
our?
is a really good question. We don't
Yes,
know.
yes.
We don't know because trauma, it looks the same. So we can have inherited our father or mother's fight, flight, freeze responses, which make us hyper vigilant or send us into a freeze response. And we can't tell if we are reliving our mother or father's experience, or we've been wounded in our early childhood in attachment, for example, a broken attachment with our mother. And then we have developed these fight, flight, freeze responses to defend against our mother, the fact that we don't trust her love. So we tighten against it, or we pull away, or we shut down because we were in an incubator, or our mother wasn't able to see us, or know us,
Okay.
or soothe us, or our mother and father
Yes,
were
yes.
breaking up when we were in utero, or father was having an affair, or he was an alcoholic. Do you know what I mean? Something happened, and
Yes, yes.
mother had a stress. Mother was stressed, and because she was stressed, she couldn't attune to us in the womb or as a little child. And then we have these fight, flight, freeze responses. So it's a good question. How do we know? Well, it's a question I think I will answer later about what are the signs of inherited family trauma. If you want to ask me that, I don't want to monopolize the whole show. I want you to talk too, but I'm happy to keep talking.
No, that's great. The more information, the more you give me, the more information, the more I learn and the more our audience can relate or can learn or understand what happens when they're having a trauma and see the difference between something that I learned from my childhood or something that I inherited from my mother, grandmother, or great grandmother, which is so
Okay.
interesting.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good segue into the next idea, or what are the signs. But Magnolia, you said something in the very beginning. You said that sometimes somebody has grief, and we're looking at, is the next generation, are we carrying that grief? Well, it could be that grief keeps a mother from being present and able to attune to her child. So the child, feeling the mother not available, then reacts with fight, flight, freeze responses, and it can look like depression because, or anxiety, because our mother isn't able to, again, to see us or know us or soothe us. So can we say that we've inherited the grief? Well, it is possible for sure, but it also, we have our own grief because our mother isn't available. Does that make sense?
Totally, totally. And that is, just boom, opening my mind. So we are like literally carrying two griefs, one
Yes.
trauma, one grief. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, if our let's take that first case I talked about. So the grandmother
Yes.
loses the love of her life and she's grieving. And unconsciously, because she's grieving, she can't really see in her child, the mother. So the mother, there's two things happening, two dynamics. The mother,
Mm-hmm.
who loses her mother in the grief, is having
Mm-hmm.
fight, flight, freeze responses to defend against not being seen. And then in the next generation, she's joining her mother unconsciously, what we call unconscious loyalty, unconscious love. That she's joining
Oh,
her mother. It's almost to say, Mommy, if you're alone without a partner, then I'll be alone without a partner. And then in the third generation, the granddaughter, destroys all of her relationships connected to the same energy. This unconscious loyalty that women aren't allowed to have a partner, that women aren't allowed to be fulfilled. They're not allowed to be happy. They're not allowed to have a man and have a good relationship because mother didn't and grandmother didn't. Um, and I heard you. You want me to tell you the signs of inherited trauma, so I'll do this. I'll tell you the signs. But I wanted to go
Yes,
back and
yes, yes.
I wanted to go back and say that first. So there are definitely
Thank you.
signs because you asked me a good question. How do we tell? How do I
Yes,
know if I have a childhood trauma or I have an inherited trauma? Because many of us feel like we're carrying something that doesn't belong to us. You know, we have a fear or a sadness or a grief, or we're struggling with a health condition that we can't explain, or we have panic attacks, or chronic fatigue, chronic exhaustion, and we don't really know what the cause is. So I've discovered that we can begin experiencing a fear or a symptom that strikes suddenly or unexpectedly. For example, when we reach a certain age, remember going back to that first case, the grandmother was in her mid 20s when she becomes a widow. The mother divorces when she's in her mid 20s. And now the granddaughter, as soon as she hits her mid 20s, her relationships fail. So this age acts almost like an alarm clock, an ancestral alarm clock that says there's no
that
happiness
happens.
after 26. So age is one factor, but there's also these milestones or events that happen in our lives. For example, everything's okay until we get married. And then all of a sudden we get married, we shut down and we can't explain it. And that could be connected to our mother was fine until she married our father who had affairs, and our mother shut down to our father, and then everything's fine until we get married, and then a woman shuts down to her husband, connected to the mother shutting down to the father. So it can be getting married. Here's another one. Um, Moving to a new place. So
Oh, that's
everything's
interesting.
fine, everybody's happy until you move to a new place, and then suddenly you become depressed like your ancestors who were persecuted or forced out of their homeland, and you are fine until you move, even though you only move around the corner. But it's the action of moving to a new place that you remember reading cases like that in the book, that
Yes,
somebody would move to go to a new place and they would have a panic attack because of what happened in the previous generation. I'll give you another one. Um, Everything's fine until we get rejected by someone in a relationship, and then all of a sudden the grief is huge. It's insurmountable, but it's taking us back to an earlier grief, a break in the attachment when our mother wasn't present. So even though this guy breaks up with you after 2 months and you go, oh, I don't want to live anymore. Oh, it's only 2 months, but it's taking you back to that earlier grief when we lose our mother, her attention, her attunement early in childhood or in the womb. I'll give you one more. Last one, I promise. I'll give you one more. Um,
no, I love that. It, that's great.
all right, last one,
When you
promise.
were giving me, no, 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 when you are giving me example, it comes to my mind, all the people that I've seen, sometimes people tell me, what happened, and I totally relate. It comes to my mind the stories that are in the book, like Jesse, 19 years old, and all
Right.
the stories that are there. I'm not gonna keep going on. It's better when it comes from you. So, yes, please go ahead.
Well, I'll just say one more because this is a very common one.
Hmm.
Everybody's fine, everybody's happy. They get married, we start to have, but then we get pregnant and we're going to have a child. And all of a sudden, it's like this ancestral alarm clock starts ringing. And it's like, I had this woman, I'm working with this woman, and everything's fine, but now she's pregnant and she's consumed with anxiety and angustia, and she doesn't understand
And
it.
she doesn't know why.
No, she doesn't know why. And I say,
Okay.
what's going on? And she goes, I don't know. I started to get panic attacks 6 months ago. I go, when did you get pregnant? She said, 6 months ago. And I went, what is it about having a child? What's your worst fear about having a child? And right away, she tells me I could harm my baby. And I said, have you ever harmed a baby? And she said, no. And I said, did anyone in your family ever harm a baby? You know, accidentally. And she said, no. And all of a sudden, a light bulb goes off and she goes, "Huh? Mi abuela, my grandmother." She says, when my grandmother was a young woman, she lit a candle and the curtains caught on fire and then the house caught on fire and her baby was upstairs sleeping and she couldn't get the baby out. And then she said, but we were never allowed to talk about it. You could never bring this up to grandmother. And you know, that's common. You hear that. But the moment she said it, we made the link. And then we understood that she had inherited this terror from her grandmother. And after that, we could break the pattern.
Wow. Mark, how can we break that cycle of trying to say, you know what, I do not want to carry this trauma anymore. It doesn't belong to me. How can you do that?
Yeah, yeah. See, look, to break the cycle, it's just like how we heal trauma. How do we heal trauma? We've got to have positive experiences that can change the brain. So, for example, boy, you know, I'm going to get into a long conversation here and just
I
stop
love it
me.
because you know what? No, that's great. I maybe skip the questions because I read the book and I know the core language and
Yeah,
how can we recognize what we say, what we pronounce, what we are repeating. So
yeah,
yes, please, that will be
yeah. Well,
great
see,
if you can
that's another
explain us how
important
to
part.
do that.
You
Yes,
see, you
yes,
see, Magnolia, that's what when somebody, for example, that last woman I told you that had angustia when she had anxiety when she got pregnant, I asked her one of my trauma questions in the book, what's your worst fear? I'm trying to get her core language. What's your worst fear about being pregnant? And she said to me, her verbal core language, her trauma language was, I'll harm a baby. And then she gives me the answer that somebody in the family had harmed a baby. So, yes, but I want to answer the bigger question because, you know, you asked me, how do we heal? And we've got to have positive experiences that can change our brain. And then we need to practice the new feelings and the new sensations associated with these positive experiences. Because when we do
I
this,
agree.
yeah, when we do this, we not only create new neural pathways, that's why you do visualization to create new neural pathways, but we also stimulate the release of feel good neurotransmitters in our brain, like serotonin and dopamine, or even feel good hormones like estrogen and oxytocin. But even the very genes that are involved in the body's stress response, they can begin to function in a different way. We can literally change the way the DNA expresses. We don't change the DNA, but we can change the way the
Got it.
DNA expresses. And well, how do we do that? So we've got to have positive experiences like, oops, oh, that noise happened again. That noise.
Can you hear it now? I think you
No, no,
were
no.
maybe just perfect,
That,
perfect. Yeah, I think I
okay, let me
just
keep
hit
going. So we've
the
got, let
table.
me,
Yes, let's keep
so we've
moving
got
forward. This is great.
So we've got to have positive experiences like um, what you do with a client. You help them reach a place of compassion, either inner compassion for themselves or compassion for their parents or their grandparents, or, you know, gratitude. That's another one. You know how we were always told to have a gratitude practice. Well, why? It changes the brain. It raises our frequency. So, you know, every
I
time
agree.
we go to sleep feeling grateful for something or wake up and we remember to name three things we're grateful for, it changes the day. Um, Generosity is another feeling. Practicing loving kindness, that's another. Practicing mindfulness. Ultimately, anything that allows us to experience strength or peace or joy inside, because these types of experiences feed the prefrontal cortex and help us reframe the stress response so that our nervous system has a chance to calm down. It, it, I'll say one more thing about this. Um, basically,
Totally. No, I love it.
basically, to heal, we have to practice being with the uncomfortable sensations in our body so we don't have a charge when we feel them. We don't leave the body. We're able to reach beneath them till we can experience sensations that we experience as life-giving, like sensations like pulsing, tingling, softening, expanding, blood flowing, waves of warmth, waves of energy, sensations of life force in our core so that we can calm our vagus nerve. And we need to be able, my what I teach in my book is we need to be able to hold these sensations for at least a minute and practice it that 1 minute 6 times a day. So for a minute 6 times a day, we need to practice being with these waves of energy or these particles of light or whatever we feel in our inner body, because that can be enough to change our brain and calm our nervous system.
I love that. You know what I do in my sessions one on one? I use conscious breathing, and I take the person, the client, into a deep relaxation. And I remember very vividly the example that you gave in the book when you imagine your or visualize your parents in front of you. So that's what I use sometimes where when my clients are having some issues where a family member, so I just change instead of the parent, just um, visualize this person in front of you and just
Have a
imagine what kind of
conversation.
energy. Yes, yes. And
Exactly. Good
it
work.
is
That,
amazing
yeah,
when people, at the end, they literally open their eyes and they look around and just say, I just feel different. Something changed. And I know what it changed because, like you mentioned, the brain has changed. And
exactly.
that's amazing. So, moving.
Exactly. It's perfect. Yeah, and sometimes, someone will say, Mark, in the book, you say that we have to heal our relationship with our parents. Well, if we find ourselves still shrinking in front of them or collapsing or defending or going into caretaking mode, we can't do it in person because we're still in the defense. But once we find our core and find our inner um, our inner calm, then we can go back untriggered. But as long as we're triggered, it doesn't make sense to go back. It's like throwing yourself in front of a moving train. So I always say, can you heal with them in your inner images? For example, I might say, okay, you have a very difficult relationship with your mother. I get it. Put her picture when she was a young woman over your left shoulder on your nightstand of your bed and look at the picture and visualize that you're talking to her higher self or her wisdom self or her soul and say, Mommy, por favor, please hold me while I'm sleeping so that I can feel less stressed or so that I can feel connected to you. Or teach me how to trust your love because I don't trust your love. Teach me how to trust it, how to receive it, and how to let it in without taking care of you, mommy, just receiving and then visualizing a stream of energy going into your core and calming your heart or expanding your heart or calming your nervous system. And you're doing this healing with a photograph because you don't have the relationship with yourself yet to
Mhm.
go do it in person. So we really have to have a relationship with ourself where we feel our potency inside. Um, we feel our core. We're connected to our core. Does that make sense? Because
Totally makes sense.
a large part of my work is helping people connect with their inner sensations and their inner calm because a lot of people don't have inner calm. They get to this place where they feel anxiety and they find it intolerable and they leave and they get busy and they look on their phone and they start scrolling because they can't go inside to be with their pain, which is the doorway to be with their peace. I remember, Magnolia, you told me that you lost your son.
That's very powerful. That's very powerful, Mark. Saying that, facing that hard situation, it's
You
the
did
door
that.
to open. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
You had to do that though. When you had that great loss, you had to go
Yes.
into your pain. There was no avoiding it. And you had to be with that pain until you found connection, stillness, spiritual connection, and then you've came out of it. I don't know you well, but I can see in your eyes the inner strength that you have, that you came out and said, I'm going to help others work with this because I walked the walk. I did it.
Thank you for mentioning that. I remembered I'm gonna just talk about a little bit about an experience that I have when I mentioned to you that my son passed away. And when you were mentioning about the picture of your mother, when my son passed away, I was in totally despair. I needed something, anything that will, take me out of that circle that the loop that I was going down. And I remember taking some uh, classes or something that will help me. And I remember that this person said, if you have a dream with your loved one, don't think that this person is next to you. Don't believe that. Or if you see a picture, don't believe that this person is gonna save you. And when she said that, I was in shock. I was like, wait a minute. I mean, when you are in grief, you need something that will help you. And
Yeah.
it's it didn't make sense to me. So feeling that pain, feeling that grief, to me, something that really helped me is seeing my son, imagining, visualizing my son in a happy
Totally.
place, being out of pain. And now that you mentioned
Totally.
this, it is very powerful. For
Totally.
some
Of
people
course.
that don't,
Because we
yeah,
don't
yes, go
die,
ahead.
we leave the body, but we're just next door. We're in the room next door. So, of course, my advice to everybody who loses somebody is talk to them. Listen to what they're telling you. Feel pulled or directed by this their energy, that they want you to see something, they want you to know something, they want you to hear something. They're just in the room next door, you know. But anyway, yeah, no, I'm glad you followed your own advice.
Thank you. And that's why I started to do my own investigations, my own study. And behind the work that you do, for some people that don't know you, most of my work,
Yeah.
when I do my work and when I do my interviews, are in Spanish. So I promise that um, I will do this in Spanish, trying to translate everything what we are talking about. So for
Good.
my audience in Spanish, I will do that. So
Good.
anyway,
The
so
book
anyway,
in
when
the
I
book in Spanish is called Este Dolor no es mío. And it's really big in Mexico. It's really big in Argentina, Colombia, everywhere. It's huge in all of Latin America. Um, it, um, yes. So please read
it
it in
is amazing.
Spanish. And also there's a
Yes.
workbook. There's not just the book, but I did a workbook last year. It's amazing, the
That's
workbook.
amazing. That's what
Yeah.
I found out when I was
Yeah.
talking to Giovanna. That is great. How does that complement the book?
Ah, okay. So the book, has lots of exercises in it, as you know. We've been talking about them. But the workbook, I figured I can't work with the whole world. So how do I do it? I wish I could work with everybody in the world, but I can't. So how can I help millions of people to heal? So I wrote this book as though I was sitting next to everybody, asking the right questions, taking them into the right somatic experience, and then going deeper and then going deeper, and then again asking deeper questions and asking about trauma language, and then teaching them how to do a genogram and look at their family tree. And then in the book, I also teach people to do family constellations, constelaciones familiares. I teach them how to do family constellations, how to put um, shoes or flip-flops or slippers on the, on your floor and stand in the footprints of your father, or stand as your mother, or stand as your young self, or your grandfather or your grandmother. And it's
Wow.
amazing. And I tried these out on the people close to me. As I was writing the book, I'd say, here, put footprints of this stand, and I'm going to ask you some questions. And the people would be crying, and I go, okay, that's it. That's what I want to put in the book. So the
Wow.
workbook is amazing. Really, I love it. The book's amazing
That
too.
also translated into
Yeah,
different
yeah,
languages?
yeah, español, yeah,
Okay,
claro.
awesome. How can get that workbook and how can people maybe we can talk
Amazon,
about it at the end.
you could get it,
Oh,
everywhere. All the booksellers have
awesome.
it. But yeah, you could get the
Awesome.
workbook and the book in English and Spanish.
That's amazing. Mark, I know there's so many work behind all this conversation for some people that don't know you. Could you please share with us how did you started all this work to learn about inherited trauma,
Okay, all
family
right.
trauma?
So I'm going to answer that question through a case because that is what
Mhm.
happened. Um, this is a long time ago. I don't know, over 35 years ago. Um, uh, 35, 30, well, over 30 years ago. Um, the late, the mid 90s. What does that make it? What is
Uh,
1996?
Mid-90s, that will
Yeah,
be
30 years ago, right?
yes, 30 years. Uh-huh.
Okay,
30
so
years.
about 30 years ago, I'm working with a lot of self-injurers. And particularly, I'm working with a lot of cutters, people who cut themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And this one woman, I'll never forget this. She was 24 years old. I'll call her Sarah just to tell the story. She cut herself in a very extreme way. She didn't just, most people they cut and it's superficial, but this woman would cut so deep that she'd hit a vein or an artery and
Wow.
she'd almost bleed to death. And then her parents would rush her to the hospital, and then they would put her in a psych ward for, 3, 4 weeks at a time. So one day she's out of the psych ward, and and I'm thinking the whole time, why is she doing this deep? She's cutting into her arms, her legs, her stomach, her abdomen. Why is
Wow.
she cutting so deeply? Because I worked with many other cutters and their cutting was more superficial. What was it about the way Sarah was cutting? What was trying to be communicated here? So she
Okay.
comes back. We're sitting in the office, and I give her a pen. I go, Sarah, pretend this pen is your razor and show me what you do. So she puts it to her arm, and all of a sudden, I could see her eyes glaze over, and I could see she was dissociating. And I said, right there, right there. What's that thought? What's that feeling right there? What's that impulse right there? And she looked at me and said, uh, uh, I don't deserve to live. Now, here I am looking at a young woman whose life has just begun. And I said, Sarah, what did you do? Did you harm somebody? Did you cause an accident? Did you break up with someone who took his life? She goes, no, nothing like that. And so I figured what has to be in her childhood. I didn't know anything about inherited trauma. So, I look at her childhood and her childhood's great. Really, she could go to her mother for nurturance and care. She can go to her father for a hug. She feels supported by her parents, encouraged. She feels safe with them. So I figure, okay, maybe it's in her attachment. And I look at the attachment with the mother, and no, it's not there. She has a safe, strong, secure attachment with her mother. Luckily, Magnolia, luckily, I asked the question, okay, tell me about your grandparents. And boom, that was it. Opened the door for me. She said, well, my grandmother was an alcoholic and she was driving the car drunk and she crashed into a pole. And my grandfather went through the glass and got cut. and bled to death before the ambulance came.
Wow.
And I went, oh. And that's the whole story. Because when she said, I don't deserve to live, whose feeling is that?
It's the grandmother.
Claro. And when she cut so deeply that she almost bleeds to death, who is she related to? Who's she connected to? Abuelo, right? So
Yeah, grandfather,
So
yes.
here's what we did. We put two chairs. I put two chairs on the center of the office, and I said, Sarah, look over there and see your grandfather and tell him how you cut. And she goes, Grandpa, I cut so deeply that I almost bleed to death. And then I said, like you, Grandpa, tell him like you, Grandpa, like you bled to death. And she says that. Now she's crying. And I said, close your eyes. What is he telling you? What's he showing you? And she goes, he doesn't want me to do this. And he tells me that when I go to cut, to feel him there, and he'll be holding me and supporting me. And I said, okay, great. Look in that chair over there and tell your grandmother, tell her what you told me. Grandma, I told Mark that I don't deserve to live. And she goes, Grandma, I told Mark I don't deserve to live. And then I said, add this sentence. The way you felt, Grandma, for taking the life of your husband. And now she's crying. And the grandmother says, when you go to cut, feel, they're both dead. Feel me there in the spirit world, holding you and supporting you. And she goes home and she goes to cut. And all of a sudden, she feels this love and support coming from both of them. And she never cut again. And that is what taught me how to look for inherited family trauma. And then after that, I took immediately a class with the great Bert Hellinger and learned his work. Bert was a great man, the father
You know what?
of family constellations.
Wow. I think, when you are telling me this experience, I think what it makes the difference, it's the questions that you make. Like you said, you first ask about how was the relationship with her parents. Then you went a little, you went deeper. You went like, okay, let's go one uh, step forward just to know what really happened. And that's how you can tell. So what I'm trying to say here is that I really appreciate the work that you do, because you have the sensibility to even kind of feel what is the next question that you have to do in order to help this person. And I have no doubt that when you do this kind of work and trying to help someone, I believe in angels. I believe in this
Yeah.
energy and this positive energy that are helping you and give you the right question, bring it to your head so you can help this person. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say?
it does make sense. I feel like you get into, when you work with people, you get into a zone. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't have any preconceived notion or idea. You just sit next to this person, and all of a sudden there's an energy that you're in an energy field. And as soon as you're sitting next to this person, the right question comes to you. You don't think it, it comes through you. It doesn't come from here, it comes from here. And then, that's exactly right. And then you're led to the next question. And, that's why I wrote the book, because, I wrote the book for therapists. And then after I wrote the book for therapists, I said, wait a minute, anybody reading this book,
Yeah.
therapist or not, can do this work. So then I expanded the book for anybody who has a fear or a feeling or an emotion or an anxiety or a symptom that they don't understand, that I teach how to I ask the right questions to that we can figure out, is it in attachment with my mother? Is it generational with my grandmother? Am I unconsciously loyal to my father or my mother? We do all these things in the book, and then we work on how to heal. So yeah, I, Magnolia, you can tell. I love the book. I really do, because I hear 3 million copies sold, but what I hear is 3 million people who did their personal work, who elevated their light, who who expanded their consciousness, who grew their heart bigger, who have more compassion, because that's what the book does. It creates expansion.
Yes, and that's amazing because sometimes you do something to help people and you don't realize how much impact it will have. Like myself, I mean, I don't even know you until I read your book, and then I had the blessing that I sent you a text, and I had the blessing that, hey, you responded, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna speak with the expert on this situation, and that through me, more people are getting to know the work, and other people, and that's a change that helps people. And I totally believe when you help other people, heal, that I will put it this way: if I will die tomorrow, I will be happy and thankful that I was able to get to know people that are trying to make this world a better place. So thank you
Magnolia,
so much,
that's
Mark.
why I responded to your text actually, because I could feel your heart through the words. And that's completely true. I read your text and I went, this person is very dear. And so I responded because you're very kind and loving, and it shows through the great trauma that you went through. As we know, this is true. We go through a great adversity. We
Yes,
lose our son, we lose our partner, we lose someone that's completely dear to us, and we're not the same person on the other side. And we've become, our heart has, they say the heart needs to break in order to open. And so what happens is that we have something so heartbreaking that we expand our own heart even bigger.
that's great. I'll take that that quote. The heart needs to break in order to be open. That's great.
Yeah, it's in the book, actually. And then there's another
Yes,
quote.
yes.
I think I say this in the book. I think I say this in the book. Only through a broken heart can dear Christ enter in. A quote by Oscar Wilde. You
Yes,
know,
yes.
um, yeah, we know this. When we've had great adversity, when we've had a dark night of the soul, we then are in a position to understand the pain of others and can help them because we've walked it before them.
I agree, Mark. I agree. Well, we could keep going on with the conversation, because speaking about traumas and grief, it's a never-ending conversation. But, in wrapping up this conversation, I would like to ask you if you could send a message or say something to the audience, what it will be.
That's a good question. I have so many messages. Um, I really do, but basically, if we or one of our children,
Mark, Mark, you can tell us all the messages that you will like, please, coming from you. Oh, I'm sure it'll be amazing. So
all right,
please do it.
all right. So really, if we or one of our kids is struggling with, unexplained symptoms, depression, anxiety, OCD, a phobia, a destructive behavior, we have to ask, what family secrets have been hidden? Ask your cousins if your parents are gone. Ask what happened to grandma, what happened to grandfather, what stories didn't get told, what traumas never healed all the way. We need to know what happened to our grandmother and our grandfather. We need to know what happened to our mother when she was little, or our father. And then we need to talk about these traumas in the family history. We get curious about them and try to work through them, do the workbook, because that's how you work through them, or get the book, just so they're not passed down to the next generation. Because the more we know about these traumas and the more we talk about them, the more we're able to bring relief in the family or to our children. Because our kids could be suffering and without a clue, without understanding why they're suffering. If we ignore the past, it can come back to haunt us. Yet when we explore it, we don't have to repeat it. We can break these destructive patterns. And I guess if I if I say one more thing, please have positive experiences in your body that you can feel uh, viscerally in the body, so that you can feel these positive experiences, because that's how we calm the brain stress response. We need to let these experiences that we feel when you do a visualization with somebody, we need to let these experiences have meaning for us. And then we need to make them a daily practice so we can change our brain.
That's amazing. Mark, if you allow me, with all the respect, I want to say something in Spanish, if that's okay with you.
Por favor.
Um, I want to say something. Quiero decir algo en español ahora que tengo aquí al autor del libro Este dolor no es mío, que les voy a compartir un poquito más de información. Se los prometo porque tiene información poderosísima. Siempre hablo de nosotros poder romper miedos, traumas que a veces no vienen de nosotros, sino de nuestra familia. Y hoy tengo al experto aquí conmigo. Así que yo les recomiendo que lean el libro Este dolor no es mío. Mark, it's been an amazing experience to have you here today. Thank you very much. So,
And thank you for what you just said. Yeah.
thank you so much.
And thank you for
Well,
having me. I enjoyed our conversation. I think this will be a good conversation that people will enjoy, and it'll get people to think, and it'll get people to explore and ask questions. Mommy, what happened when you were a little girl? Tell me about your relationship with your mother. And Poppy, what happened? When you were small, you said you had a difficult childhood. Tell me more. Things like this. It's so important to ask these questions. And here's another one. Mommy, what were you thinking or feeling when I was in utero? Tell me what was.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I think
That's really,
I
that's,
said enough.
no, that's great because, saying something real quick when I was a teenager, my personality was, it's strong and people, my uh, family will used to say, put me like some, what's the word that I'm trying to find in English? Some, uh, anyway, some saying something like you are like so rude, you are so stubborn like a mule. My mom used to say that you are so stubborn like a mule, and I kind of learned, I kind of put that into me, or I kind of that was like I took that as my personality. When I was growing, I asked my mom how she was feeling when she was pregnant. When I was inside her womb,
Yes.
what feelings did she have? What experiences did she
Yes.
have? What traumas did she have? And
Yes.
this kind of helped me to understand, wait a minute, I don't have to be that way. I can change, like you said, I can change my brain, I can change the way I think, and I can change the way, I take things into my life. So that's a very
Mm,
powerful information because sometimes you are not that person. That personality does not come from you. It comes from someone else, and you have the power to change it, and you have the power to cut those that change that will help future generations.
totally. Totally. Good questions. And I'm glad you did that. And then what comes after that? I can see right here in front of me. You're smiling and alive and a lot of vitality and aliveness. So it was a pleasure to work with you today.
Thank you, Mark. I have the feeling that this is not the ending of this conversation. Look forward to get the book and the workbook that comes with it. So thank you so much. Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to learn and keep learning from you. Thank you very much. Para las personas que nos han acompañado el día de hoy, muchísimas gracias, les agradezco. Ustedes saben que siempre traigo a personas que nos ayudan a tener una mejor ánimo, esperanza de la vida. Y hoy tuvimos a Mark Wolyn. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you so much for making this world a better place and for helping to bring love, peace, and hope to this world. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you, Magnolia. So we did good. Yeah.